People sometimes talk about small business having many advantages relative to large business. And there are a number of government policies and other programs that are designed to get more small business or to encourage small business and so forth. And I sometimes get asked, well, how much small business should there be? Or what's the optimal ratio between small enterprise, medium-sized enterprise, large enterprise? And my answer is always, how could you answer a question like that ahead of time, right? The answer is whatever proportion of small, medium, and large results from free and open competition among profit-seeking entrepreneurs. I don't know what the number is. I can't tell you what the number is. Likewise, what is the optimal distribution of the population between rural and urban? How should farmland be allocated between crops and animal husbandry and so forth? Which agricultural commodities should be, should we have more corn or less corn? I don't think these are questions that government planners or questions that professors or journalists or advocates or whatever can possibly answer. There's simply no way to give a good answer to that without sort of seeing how things play out. So if we encourage competition among people in a variety of different circumstances and different types of communities and so forth, we can let the market sort this out rather than try to come up with a scheme in our minds and then impose it from above.
In that case, sometimes that makes people uncomfortable when we talk about things like that. In theory, that's wonderful. It puts that producer, those especially we've been talking about agriculture, puts those ag producers in a great position to help maybe have more of a say in where they go, maybe more determine their own destiny, so to speak, than in that top-down model where we're forcing a system on top of them. However, there are some that say, well, that's a great theory, but boy, that's scary when you talk about implementing that, because we haven't seen what that looks like in a long time.
No, you're absolutely right. It is. But I think the right response to that would be to say, well, but look at other people in other walks of life. They all face uncertainties like that too. It's hard to justify a set of policies that says, okay, in this one industry, thinking of production agriculture as an industry, we're going to take steps to make sure that things don't change very much. But in transportation, in energy, in steel, in electronics, in clothing, in every other industry, you got to kind of ride the wind of the market. I think to some degree, right, just sort of culturally and socially, as Americans were influenced by, the Jeffersonian ideal of the yeoman farmer and so on, we kind of have that in our national culture. If we want to preserve that by legislation, we can certainly try. As we've already discussed, that's a very difficult thing to do, but it comes at a cost. And let me give you another example. Remember that protecting one industry or one activity, when it's tough to make a go of it in the absence of the protection, means putting a cost on some other industry. And there are a lot of agricultural commodities for which the U.S. is not the most efficient producer. We have our good friends in places like Brazil, for example, that would love to be able to sell their sugar in the U.S., but because the U.S. sugar lobby is extremely politically powerful, we grow sugar in Louisiana at a much higher cost than sugar can be grown in the Caribbean and in Latin America and South America. So if I say I'm a sugar farmer in Louisiana and I've been farming sugar for this many generations, okay, fine. If we have policies that protect me, so I don't have to have that fear that you mentioned, that's fine, but we just need to be explicit about the fact that American consumers are paying higher prices for sugar than they otherwise would, and some poor Brazilian farmer is worse off than he otherwise would have been because he can't sell his sugar to Americans. Should we care about the well-being of Brazilians? You might say no. As a political matter, no. Even that's an issue. But what you're saying is the vast majority of Americans who are not sugar farmers should essentially put a few pennies every day into the hands of a small number of people who are sugar farmers. Is that the right policy? Is that a fair policy? It's hard to say, but we don't usually talk about it that way because it makes us uncomfortable. And certainly sugar farmers don't talk about it that way.
What does that system look like other places? I'm sure you've done some, even just at a general level, looking across the globe, really.
Sure.
that, you know, you look at what our system looks like, whether it's ag-related or other areas, and other countries do it differently. Is there a better way?
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, there is a lot of variety across the world in openness to foreign trade in general, and even in agriculture in particular. Just to use agriculture as an example, most of Western Europe is just as protectionist or even more protectionist than we are towards agriculture. Russia and China are a little bit different, but there are a few places that have experimented with radical free market agricultural policies. New Zealand is the best known example that about 10 years ago eliminated all agricultural, they had no farm policy whatsoever, no subsidies for production and no tariff protection for domestic producers. And almost everybody in the know said, oh, this is going to be a disaster. It's going to completely decimate the New Zealand agricultural sector. But the response was that the agricultural sector in New Zealand got much stronger. There was some reallocation and some weak producers exited and new ones came in. I mean, in the dairy sector, for example, the New Zealand company Fonterra is the world's leading dairy company. Doesn't have any subsidy whatsoever. Australia also went a little bit in that direction, though not quite as far. Also, some of you are familiar with these rankings that different organizations produce of sort of economic freedom or economic liberty in different countries. The Fraser Institute publishes the best known such ranking, but the Heritage Foundation has one as well. The Legatum Institute does a similar ranking. The U.S. is not bad, but not as high as you would think. The U.S. I think this year the U.S. is in the teens in terms of countries that have the most free market policies towards business. So the least amount of trade protection, the least amount of government subsidy, least amount of bureaucratic red tape, and so forth. We often find, sometimes it's quite surprising when you look at those rankings, the countries that have the freest economies are countries like the Nordic countries, for example. You say, well, but Sweden, I thought they were all socialists, right? Well, Sweden, Norway, Denmark, a lot of Northern European countries, they have very heavy, they have high income taxes and huge, healthcare subsidies and so on. But they don't tax and regulate their businesses nearly as much as we do in the U.S. So they have very strong business communities. Now, whether they're social policy and welfare policies and health policies the right ones is a separate question. My point is, a lot of countries are have much more free market oriented policies than the U.S. does.